there. I'm Leslie Wolf, InterDrone's conference producer, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us at this webinar. So today's topic is safety drones, applications, and COVID-19. And we're joined by Chief Charles Werner, retired fire chief, current director of drone responders, as well as Dr. Amber Wilson, manager of aviation technology for Virginia Department of Aviation, and she'll be moderating. So before we get started, I have a couple of just quick housekeeping notes. Excuse me. So listening to the webcast, the audio is being broadcast over the internet. So you want to make sure that your computer's audio is available, unmuted, and that your volume is turned up. If you're having any trouble with the audio, you can just click the little question mark and you should test your system and maybe fix problems there. But also note that if you have audio issues, sometimes disconnecting from the webinar and then rejoining can fix those issues. So as far as asking questions, you can feel free to submit your questions while the webinar is ongoing. On the left side of your screen, you should see a box that says ask a question. You can enter your question there. Questions will be likely answered at the end of the webinar during our Q&A portion. And then if you have any sort of technical issues, you can ask questions related to that in the ask a question box as well. We have staff available to help you out and answer those questions immediately. All right, so with that, I will now hand it over to Amber to get things started.
Perfect, thank you. Thank you very much for joining us today for our webinar. Here at the Virginia Department of Aviation, we use drones in a number of ways, and on this slide you'll see that we use it. Our newest project is the Virginia Flight Information Exchange, and let me change that slide. So the Virginia Flight Information Exchange is a public platform. It's a platform for state and local governments to data share and information share on advisories that are going on. About a year ago, we identified a gap in information sharing. For example, if there was a crash up or an airport was doing something, there were a number of people who weren't aware of advisories going on. So about a year ago, a number of us sat at the table, organizations, the Center for Innovative Technology, the Virginia Department of Aviation, as well as the Virginia Department of Transportation. We sat around a table and discovered the gaps, and we also created a platform to solve that problem. This is open to the public. We are really excited about the launch. It happens next month, and then throughout the summer, more organizations at a state and local agency, as well as UAS operators and the general public, will be able to view this as well. So we are very excited about that project, but for today's presentation, we are going to focus more on public safety use of drones, how that improves operational effectiveness, what is the response to COVID-19, and the lessons learned from that. So from here, I will pass it over to Charles, and throughout it, you'll see me in the chat box kind of talking to different people. Please submit your questions, and I'll be back at the end to ask Charles those questions and to answer any other questions you may have.
Thanks, Amber. So today we're going to talk about public safety drones, public safety applications, and we're going to talk a little bit about COVID-19. But before we get into the actual presentation, I always like to ask this question, and I want you to think about this question as I go through the presentation on the different applications. Would you ever put your personnel or citizens in harm's way unnecessarily? Again, think about this question as I go through and begin to start showing you some of the different applications. We've now seen from structural firefighting that we can provide an Overwatch. As you can see in this picture, the main body of the first fire is on the left of the screen. On the right side, you can also see where some fire brands have traveled over and set a secondary structure on fire. This is something you might not be able to see without that eyes from the sky. Again, in a structural fire situation, thermal imaging, this gives an example of FDNY that launches a drone for every second alarm or greater is tethered. They're now going to free flight operations. But what you can see here is firefighters operating on a roof. The roof is the most dangerous place a firefighter will ever operate during a structure fire because of the potential collapse. And here you can see and maintain an Overwatch, see the firefighter locations, and you can see what else is going on with that. Here's another picture from thermal imaging from a structure fire in the UK. And what you can see here is a great deal of heat signature. You can see where the roof is actually burned away, but you can see the really hot areas of the structure. This is very important for determining the best fire attack, but it also gives an idea of where to keep firefighters off of a roof and potential collapse and then preventing injury. Now, here's a really interesting case. You can see where the photo on the left shows the normal camera view, where the right view shows a FLIR image, a thermal image, where you can actually see the heat and the fire through the smoke. So the smoke really masks anything you might be able to see without that visual thermal image. One of the really interesting cases that we had recently is Notre Dame fire in France. Here, the drone became instrumental in flying above Notre Dame and determining where there was an effective place to make a structural firefighting to stop the spread. And what they did in combination with that is they used a robot called Colossal that actually took heavy stream in place and then was able to stop the fire spread and save a large portion of the building. In major traffic accidents, again, being able to see things from the sky in a multi vehicle type of fire or situation like this gives you a much better understanding of just what you're faced with. What's the magnitude? What resources do you need? How is this going to impact traffic? So again, it greatly increases your situational awareness. The same is true in a hazmat spill or Overwatch, is you can actually see things that you can't see from the ground. So you might see where a release is going in and contaminating the water. You can see the actual operation as it takes place. And if you go to a thermal image, you can often see a plume or the gas moving in a direction that you can't visibly see with the naked eye. And then what we're seeing is we're able to combine GIS and digital imagery together because really, when it gets down to it, when we talk about the drone, it's not really the drone that's providing the information, it's the sensor or the payload on the drone. So in this case, we're taking visual imagery and we're combining it into a geospatial reference and then being able to create dashboards. And what we're able to see is some very significant damage at a very high resolution, and we can tie that to the GIS locations on a map, as you saw on the first slide. And we can zoom in on this to get a little bit better picture. Again, we can zoom in. What becomes important here is not so much that it's going to help us determine how to do anything as far as firefighting at this point, but it does give us damage assessments. It gives us an understanding of how bad is bad. It also gives us a way to take information and transfer that over to insurance companies to help the recovery of the person who's lost everything. Again, we're starting to see a dashboard. This is from the campfire in California. The dashboard has the slider. I can't really slide it back and forth in this presentation, but you can move it from left to right to see the before the fire and the after the fire. And here you can see what major damage took place in this particular fire and the other similar fires in California. In the UK, more than anywhere else, they're using thermal imaging to catch poachers. And so you can see the thermal imaging sees the rhino in this case, but they can also see in the background in the upper part of that circle is the poachers who think they're hidden in a forest area, which are actually being seen now by the law enforcement officials who go and arrest the poachers. So I want to talk about probably one of the most well-known programs in the world today, and it's from the Chula Vista Police Department, and it's called Drone as a First Responder. As part of the integration pilot project of the FAA, they were able to partner in the San Diego IPP to develop this program. And what's interesting is they use the drone literally as a responder. It is dispatched from the immediate time of a call and flies over the scene of an incident, and it gives immediate situational awareness back to the dispatcher and then, of course, to the police officer as well. To date, I think since October of 2018, they've run 2455 calls with the drone. I was actually on the phone with them today. They're going to surpass 2,500 today. They have 12 to 15 calls per day that this drone actually responds to. And in these statistics that are showing here, it has assisted in 317 arrests. It has also been able to release units. So they're able to determine situations where a police officer is not needed, and they're able to clear that call. First on the scene, 1,062 times of those 2,455 in the statistics list. And on average, the response time on scene in seconds is 114 seconds. That's a pretty good response time. So they're able to see situations that can help to prioritize the call and get units responding that may not have been, or to de-escalate the case. I will tell one unique story that is very important to understand the value of such a program. They had an individual reported with a gun outside of a restaurant acting strange. They were able to fly in with their drone over top and watch from a safe position while officers were staged. And they actually were able to understand through the zooming in of the drone that what the person had was a cigarette lighter in the shape of a gun. So you can imagine that just de-escalated the whole situation. The police were able to go in and quickly resolve the issue. No one was hurt. Without that kind of intelligence, it could have been very tragic. Here you can see an actual illustration or image from locating a lost person in UK. This is actually a video, and you can actually see the conversation with the person that's monitoring the screen that's showing where the drone information, and they're able to locate the victim. And in the video, which is very exciting, is you can see the person wave their arms. So they know immediately that the person that's been lost for several hours is alive. What also is good, what you can't see to the left of that, are the rescuers that are on their way to rescue this person. And between the rescuers and the victim, you can see the bodies of water that are in place. And what this does is allows the drone pilot and the observers to give information to the rescuers to avoid going into or potentially falling into a water area and becoming injured. Unfortunately, I have to tell about a tragic experience in Charlottesville, Virginia, in the Unite the Right rally that occurred August 12th of 2017. And this was where Heather Heyer, a young lady, was there to stand up against evil. And she was struck by a vehicle by one of the participants of this Unite the Right rally. What was important about this is the drone captured the moment this happened, and this is what you're seeing in this still photograph, which gave instant situational awareness to public safety on the number of injuries that were a result of this. And it was a mass casualty incident. I think there may have been as many as 29 people that were injured. Similar Richmond, Virginia Confederate statue protest. What was interesting about this is the drone was flying at a height where it could maintain constant overwatch. And what it was able to do, these protesters decided to go into a protest march, which was unplanned. And their goal was to disrupt traffic in all the different areas. And what the drone was able to do was to fly at least a block in advance and work with motorcycle law enforcement officers to stop the traffic at those intersections to avoid a conflict between vehicles and pedestrians. So while this peaceful march went on, there was no conflict with vehicles, and everyone remained safe when it was over. Another unique story about this is originally there was a resistance to use the drone footage because they had a police helicopter that was flying in the sky. They got a report that there were men with long guns, and there was some concern as to find them. Well, the helicopter has limitations as to how low it can fly, the resolution of the video. And after looking for a little bit, they were unsuccessful. They've switched over to the drones and assigned the drones to go take a look. And the drone was actually able to locate the three men with long guns in about 3 minutes. And it was from that point forward in the rest of the operation that the drone footage was what was used from that point throughout the incident. Again, here's Hurricane Harvey, the floods in Brays Bayou and surrounding areas. What this does, this eye view from the sky, is it provides us with immediate situational awareness. We've seen some of the disasters that are worse than we've ever seen in history. And what this does is it tells us very quickly how bad is bad. And why that's important is it tells us what resources we're going to need from the state and the federal level to get actually mitigation started as quickly as possible, but also to know what areas we're going to have to go in and do rescues with, as well as this progresses or it de-escalates from a storm perspective. It tells us when roads are open and accessibility. This is a call in Chesterfield, Virginia, of a tornado. Unfortunately, one person lost their life in this. Again, the drone gives you the ability to look into areas that may be difficult to access as far as responders, either just inaccessibility or unsafe to do so. This is an Elon, Virginia tornado. One of the things that happened with me is that I had agreed to serve as an acting deputy state coordinator for the Virginia Department of Emergency Management after I retired from the fire department, only to have, not too long after taking the position, 7 tornadoes in one day. This, again, gives you that elevated view to show the level of damage and what areas are impacted. This can immediately be shared through different formats of sending imagery, or even doing live streaming to show what the situation looks like to an emergency operations center. In Alabama, we saw a huge tornado. I can't remember exactly how long it was. I think it was 3 miles wide and maybe 20 miles long. And it was one of the first times that the news stories reported that search and rescue was being conducted from the ground and the sky with the use of drones. And what the drones were able to do is to fly over a lot of different areas to show that high altitude view, and could go over areas where there was inaccessibility because trees had fallen across roads, and they could actually determine if they needed to expedite or prioritize beyond that, where that tree was blocking the road, or if they could actually take the time to remove the tree and move on. And of course, we had the lava flow and the eruptions, the fissures that occurred in Hawaii, and they were able to watch the spread of the volcano from a safe distance. In some cases, destroyed a number of different structures. There were also fissures that occurred in different places, and what the drones were able to do was to fly over areas, and using sulfur dioxide sensing devices on the drones, they were able to identify the presence of sulfur dioxide and evacuate people that were in the area from harm's way. From a law enforcement tactical operations, there's a huge advantage. I'll use a similar comparison. We know that from the military that drones are used before, during, and after missions. There's very seldom any time that you won't see missions with military not utilizing drones because of that information it provides. What can now happen is law enforcement can fly into a tactical operations that's going to occur and understand the landscape, what it looks like, the people in the area, and then maintain an overwatch as a SWAT team may be entering a building. This becomes particularly important when things might occur, people may be positioned, or there may be shooters in a different location. And what was really telling in one of the stories one of my colleagues shared is that they were doing the overwatch as they made entry. The criminals went out the window and out the back door and threw drugs up on a roof, threw guns in the bushes, and one guy actually left and had planned this and had a black shirt on, peeled off his black shirt with a pink shirt, and went through some bushes out to the next block. Obviously, he didn't know the drone was watching, and they were able to alert the police officers who were standing on the corner at the next block. And as this person approached, very confident that he was not going to be arrested, they just asked him, "Have you seen a guy in a black shirt?" And as he came up to him, they arrested him. So a similar tactical operation in the Everglades, I believe they had a person they were pursuing who actually went on a little bit of a sandbar and was hidden by some trees. And the police very simply said through a bullhorn, "Hey, we just want to let you know you can stay where you are, or you can come to us, but we just want to let you know that 5 alligators are descending on your location." I believe I was told that after about 15 seconds, this gentleman was in custody. We've also seen where software like Pix4D offers the ability to do traffic crash reconstruction about a third of the time, which most importantly reduces secondary accidents, which is very important to both responders and citizens who may be involved in those secondary accidents. What's really exciting new is they just added Pix4D React, which is a 2D software assessment that can do much more quick damage assessments to give some information that can be shared with others on an existing laptop at the scene, as opposed to going into in the cloud processing. This is a photograph from NCIS Forensics, 3D model they did of, this is actually just a demonstration that they did to try to find out, what could the imaging do, and they were flying from about 25 feet. They were able to create a 3D image without doing any prop wash, disruption of the scene itself, and that gives the ability to come back later and look at things and examine something that you might not have thought of before. In hazmat operation, I will say one of the most well-known departments that are doing some really great work in hazmat operations is Southern Manatee Fire Rescue in Florida, where they've been doing some testing and trials and able to fly the drone in such a way that it can give an assessment of what they're dealing with, can identify the tools they need to take in, can also identify the suit that needs to be used. And they have said that on average, the use of a drone has reduced their entry time by an hour. That's amazing. That means we get in more quickly, we get in more safely, and we know what tools to take. And then in their operation, if they actually have a tool that's needed, in the past, a hazmat technician would have had to walk back out to a warm zone where someone could have put a tool that they would carry back in. Now the drone can bring the tool and drop it close by into a proximity and make that much more quickly done. The hazmat operation from a thermal image perspective is also very exciting. It gives us the ability to look into a container and determine how much liquid is in the container. So we know basically how much of content's there, and that's very important, especially if you're dealing with an impingement of flame on a tank or such. In addition, as I mentioned earlier, the thermal image lets us to see a plume that may be moving in a different area because of its temperature variance will show us where the visual eye might not be able to see that. In a train derailment for hazmat, it's a very similar value. That overhead view allows us to see things that in a rural area we might not even be able to access very quickly. So determining what's involved from the standpoint of a hazmat situation becomes very problematic. The drone gives us an idea of what's involved. And in the left picture, you can see where the train derailment is in a waterway, which now creates an entirely different situation of what hazardous materials do we have? Is it contaminated the waterway? Where is this spill headed in the waterway? Do we have to, how far downstream do we have to look to be taking care of issues? So again, it gives us an idea of what we're going to need to use to mitigate this situation and also in the ultimate recovery. Also on the right picture, you can see train cars, tank cars that are also derailed. It looks like at some point there was a fire. And again, you can, from this, determine what the magnitude of the emergency is and what danger it may present to people in nearby neighborhoods or in the community itself. One of the new things that was recently reported is that drones were used to do radioactive monitoring in Chernobyl, where the nuclear reactor disaster occurred. And what they were able to do was more accurately map the radiation. But what was even more exciting, or maybe unfortunately disturbing, was that they identified new radioactive hotspots that they weren't aware of. So again, the drone allows this all to be done without being done by human interaction, to where humans could be exposed to the radiation and become sick or even die from it. Drones are also being used for monitoring critical infrastructure. In some cases, this can be combined with artificial intelligence, and it can do routine flights over a critical infrastructure, and it will immediately compare its current capture to a previous capture and identify if there's anomalies or something different. In addition, the drones can be used to identify persons that are in areas that they shouldn't be and can alert the appropriate people as it's identified. Here you see an image of the Oroville Dam in California, and of course everybody saw this on the news. What they were able to do throughout this process was be able to utilize the drones to take regular assessments. And because they could be put up quickly and done in minutes, and the information could come back, they could inexpensively determine, was the situation getting worse? What was the condition of the spillway? And giving them a little bit better heads up of the planning of what they might need to do with neighborhoods or communities downstream. We're also seeing that drones are good to use for inspecting bridges, or at least to do some initial assessments. The actual inspection of bridges in some ways has to be done physically because it requires some manual types of operation, but the drone can actually give some very good quick assessments of any serious damage that may have come from an earthquake, or to see what's happening after a flood where a lot of debris may have hit up against the bridge. The Parrot Anafi drone has the ability to look up, so that's kind of an interesting new aspect. And then being able to go from a normal view to a thermal image view, again, gives some different aspects that you can't necessarily see with the naked eye. One of the newest systems that's come out is the situational awareness system by Pierce Manufacturing, which utilizes a photokite drone, which is tethered. As you can see here, it's coming out of the side compartment. They just announced from photokite that they have the ability to do an on-cab or on top of vehicle mounting, so it can be launched directly from a vehicle very quickly. The tethered drone itself has the ability to be launched with one button push, and has the ability to flip back and forth from the visual optic to a thermal image. It gives that ability to see, as you can see on the tablet, the different views, and you can switch back and forth between the two. This means that a fire department or public safety agency could pull up with a vehicle, and they could launch the tethered drone in such a way that it can maintain a persistent overwatch of that immediate area. And the reason it can maintain that persistent overwatch is that the tether provides the power source. So it's not limited by the amount of time it can fly due to the batteries on board. The other unique thing about the tethered drone is that under the most recent FAA Reauthorization Act, it defined tethered drones as not requiring a certified remote pilot to operate. The FAA, however, is very encouraging that we use a visual observer just so that we maintain an overwatch of the operation. And in a fire operation, that can easily be done by a pump operator or something like that. What you see next is AT&T. It has a FirstNet flying cell on wings, or a cow, and it connects and can provide LTE coverage in areas that are temporarily without coverage, or perhaps even provide coverage that didn't have it before. They did this in Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, and this provided some much needed cell service to help deal with some of the immediate situations they were faced with. So one of the newest things that's come out, this is an example of Edgebees and its augmented reality, which becomes important, especially when you are in a situation where you have the geographic references destroyed. This might be in a very serious hurricane that comes through and just wipes out everything, or it could be in a situation of a wildfire situation. So if you'll pardon me for 1 minute, I just have to take care of something. I apologize for this. It's just a little bit of a personal emergency. Okay, I'm back. So in those situations where you have augmented reality, you have those situations where this provides you some of those overlays that provide information that's otherwise gone. So I ask you, when we get to this point, would you ever put your personnel or citizens in harm's way unnecessarily? And I say that because you see so much more that you otherwise would not see. And if you aren't using drones, you're possibly doing just that, because you're not making decisions in such a way that is making sure that everyone is safe. So let's talk a little bit about the coronavirus COVID-19 use cases. We had some good examples and some bad examples, and I want to kind of cover those as to how they worked out as far as being positive and negative. We know that in China, Spain, France, Italy, and even some of the United States, they were used to identify and disperse crowds, and it was all with the intent of flattening the curve. What we learned from that is that the drones flying over created a nuance that was a little bit different than what people are used to. So some of the people, it was reported in one of the articles I read, felt that it was kind of like a sci-fi feeling, and that it was possibly creepy. The other thing that we learned is that when it was used in a very forceful way of yelling at people, telling people to disperse, and that kind of thing, it wasn't received very well by the community either. On the other hand, what we did see, if the drones were flying, really not invading privacy, and came in and they were reminding people to please maintain distances. Again, it was a matter of courtesy, but it was also a matter of how you communicate the message, and if it's clearly audible. Some of the drone speakers we heard were not very audible, so people couldn't even understand what the drone was saying. So it created some confusion. We've made great strides since the hurricanes of drones being known for drones for good, and now we're seeing the need to be careful in how we utilize drones so we don't disrupt what we've achieved. The other thing we saw was some spray disinfectants of drones in different areas. Not really sure, haven't seen the reports on that about how effective it is. If you can spray disinfectant over different areas, how often do you need to do that, and how effective is it getting to the areas that need to be covered? I will tell you that one area that really had some great success was Chula Vista, California. They used it to monitor and moreover to inform the homeless. There was some homeless populations out a distance from the community. They could fly over, and they went in with their loudspeaker and informed the homeless population of new resource centers that were open for free medical treatment, free medical supplies, or other things they might need. So in addition to that, we saw that some drones were used in the entranceway to different facilities to monitor for temperatures. And in that case, we also saw some resistance. In the community, we have, I think in Connecticut, there was an interest in actually doing a drone monitoring, which can now monitor and detect COVID-19 signs, coughing, pulse rates, respirations, and temperature. I don't know the distance they actually can do that from, but it was very quickly stopped by the community as it was just not received very well. And then the last is delivering medical supplies and those types of things. Zipline in Africa has done over 30,000 medical deliveries. Some places in the United States, they're doing deliveries which are also delivering organs from one facility to another. So let me go next over here. So when you get into implementing a public safety UAS program, there is more involved than buying and flying. They are actually the two easiest things that you will ever do. What people don't realize is that there's a lot of logistics, there's a lot of maintenance, there's a lot of record keeping documentation that needs to be done. And if you have a certificate of authorization, you also have to do monthly reports to the FAA. I will tell you that we have a list of guidelines and considerations at the Drone Responders website in our resource center. Drone Responders is a nonprofit organization and membership is free. I would urge you to visit the website and access that resource center in this particular file. Or if you have files of your own, you can actually come to this location and upload your files to share with others. Currently, there are over 400 documents that can be used to share with other public safety agencies, which has really helped a lot of people get started and preventing them from having to start from scratch like a lot of us did. So as far as drone responders, I just want to go through very quickly and tell you about our mission. Basically is to provide shared UAS knowledge and education among public safety agencies. All of this is done to advance the use of public safety UAS. We have an online resource center, as I mentioned. We're working diligently in the development of standards. In the conferences that we hold, we do something a little bit different. We actually provide content, but we also go into having conversations with stakeholders to identify what are the priorities that we need to work on. At the last conference, our 3 priorities were the standards and training for certifying remote pilots was number 1. The second was beyond visual line of sight tactical waivers. And the third was community outreach to show how to present to the communities to keep transparency and provide information as far as privacy. We're looking forward to standardized equipment and certifications, and again, professionally proficient UAS operations, and at some point to look to try to build a global directory of emergency UAS assets. Before I get into wrapping this up, I wanted to go back to Amber and see if Amber has some questions that she'd like to ask to move forward.
Yeah, I have a few questions, and then we will kind of take a number of great questions coming in from everyone, so I will share those. So my first question are, what are the things that departments can or should be doing before they start a drone program?
Well, one would be to come and get the guidelines and considerations, but find out who around you is doing a program and actually reach out to them and see what they've done, see what they've purchased. You can probably get a lot of mentoring that can come from that. You can also learn from their mistakes. And that way you can learn about what missions they're flying and are they doing a single discipline team or is it a multidiscipline team and so on.
And can you touch a little bit on the requirements for a person to become a public safety remote pilot in charge? I know there's been a couple of questions kind of surrounding that. Is there a difference between a Part 107, a COA, both? You kind of mentioned all of this. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Sure. So if you're going to fly without a COA, and a COA is a certificate of authorization, and that certificate of authorization is usually for public aircraft operations. That means it's got to be an entity, a town, a city, a tribe, or a state agency, federal agency, and so on. And only those can receive a COA. Within the COA, they have what's the authority to do self-certifications. And that typically is not recommended without additional information such as Part 107. If you're going to fly commercially, or you're going to fly even your public safety agency under Part 107, you can do that, and that requires to take a knowledge test with the FAA. That's $150 per person, and it's required for renewal every 2 years to do that. Now the question comes up, should we do Part 107, should we do a COA, or should we do both? And what we've seen is that we recommend both because it gives you the most diversity. And I'll give you a couple examples of the change between Part 107 and a COA. Under a COA, public agencies are required to have a visual observer. And it's okay, except there are situations when you may not have a visual observer to be able to fly. And I'll give you an example. You might be out and the first person to arrive who's a drone pilot, and you have the train derailment that we showed in the pictures. In that situation, the person that gets there first could simply put the drone up and fly by themselves, but they can't under a COA. With Part 107, you don't have to have a visual observer. So you would be able to fly under Part 107 rules. What's important to understand is that if you have both, you have to also determine from the beginning of the mission and throughout the mission which set of rules you're going to fly under. So if you're going to fly and you want to fly as an individual without a visual observer, you're going to fly Part 107. If you're going to fly under a COA, you have to have a visual observer. Some other things that are different is Part 107, if you want to fly over people, you have to have a waiver. However, under a COA, under emergency incident, the public agency can fly in the area that they have control over. So there's some big differences there. But to get the most diversity from flying, you want to do both.
Perfect. All right, so those are my questions, and I have more from a number of them that come in. So do you want to finish up there, and then we'll go to Q&A from the audience?
Okay. Couple things I want to talk about before we go on to the other questions. We're working with drone responders and other public safety agencies with the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, currently on what we call a close proximity, low altitude, beyond visual line of sight waiver. What this means is we're working to ask, can we have the ability to fly 1,000, 1,500 feet out horizontally and around a building while staying under 100 feet? The reason for that is that in an active shooter situation or something similar, we can fly around and be able to identify the location of a shooter who may be in a groove in a building or a nook that can't be seen while flying above. We also believe that this particular scenario, flying at the distances we're talking about, does not create any additional dangers in the national airspace because of we're staying under 100 feet or at least within 50 feet of a structure. So there's not going to be any conflict between unmanned aircraft. And with that, I'm going to stop, and we'll let you know how the progress goes with that. And hopefully that will be something that will allow us to be able to operate much more quickly. One last thing that I just thought about is there is the ability to fly unusual situations when you're in an emergency situation. You need to fly right now. And the FAA has what's called the SGI, a special government interest. And for those people that have been in it for a while, it was formerly called an emergency COA. They have a number you can call 24 hours a day. If you're in dire straits, you need to fly right now because it's a life-threatening situation. The FAA would usually be able to give you permission to fly within minutes. The FAA and the SOSC have been fantastic supporters of public safety. And I'll stop with that. If we can now flip over to what other questions you might have.
Sure. There's a couple of questions surrounding kind of the topic of DJI. So I want to kind of go there. Do you foresee any major issues with DJI given the prohibiting the purchase from several government departments? And has the banning of DJI products for government agencies affected your operations with drone responders? So it's a two-part question.
Okay. So the issue of DJI drones is surrounded by the issue of I think it's the American Drone Security Act, which is now going through the houses of Congress for discussion. We do know that some federal bans have been put on that have downed fleets such as the Department of Interior and others. It hasn't directly affected drone responders, but I do know that it has impacted the ability for some of those agencies to do the same level of services that they may have been able to do before because of that downing of the fleet. I'll go into a little bit about this because I think it's important people stay aware. I really strongly recommend that people stay informed about what this legislation is going to do if it does go through. For example, I think the latest versions of this legislation would ban federal agencies from the use of Chinese drones. It would allow public safety agencies to continue to use the grant money for 2 years. And after that 2 years, then I believe the grant money would not be allowed to purchase drones for public safety agencies. It does not, however, have any impact on public safety agencies that currently have any of those drones. It does not restrict now, or even when the legislation is placed, their use of drones. I think that what's important is the Department of Homeland Security, the CISA department has put out a bulletin which gives an overview of how to protect your data, and that's something important to do if you're going to be doing it, especially if you're flying a sensitive mission or in sensitive areas.
Perfect. Another kind of technical question, can you talk a little bit about connectivity options, such as 4G, LTE, or 5G connectivity in the future? What connectivity are you using now? And then where do you foresee that going in the future?
So the connectivity really is probably more prevalent when it comes to the streaming of video. I think currently most people are probably using 4G LTE, and that helps to stream the data to people who have accessibility. And of course, you have to have a way that you're actually going to make that streaming available to people. In the streaming side of things, it's important also to understand that that when you're streaming, if you're streaming sensitive information, you want to make sure that it's encrypted. So you want to look at some of those technologies. As far as 5G is still a little bit out of reach. That will come, and I think what we'll see with the 5G is that we'll see a great deal more speed of downloads and reliability as it goes forward.
So what software do you think is best for thermal imaging for drones? So what drone data software is best used for thermal imaging? And what model of drone would you recommend for public safety?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear your question.
Sure. So what model drone would you recommend for public safety, and what data software do you believe is best for thermal imaging?
So I really don't recommend any particular type of aircraft because it really depends on the missions you're flying. What we're seeing is that most departments are having multiple drones because they meet different needs. I will give you a story that was given by one of the California remote pilots in the Los Angeles City Fire, who said from their perspective right now, their workhorse is the Mavic. Because it's small, it's easy to fly, and it gives the situational awareness they're looking for. One of my other friends I just spoke with yesterday, York County, Virginia, Deputy Chief Chris Sadler was basically saying that in the situations where you're flying and you need to be looking and identifying certain things, you want to have something like the Mavic 210 that has a higher zoom capability. And Chula Vista reinforced that was, if you're flying these missions and you're trying to identify what is somebody holding in their hand, is it a weapon or is it something else, that zoom capability becomes really important. And then that type of drone is going to be needed to do that. So it's really mission oriented. And I think you're going to see that, let me just give you a couple examples of what's happened over time. Over time, departments have started off with one drone, with the missions they had in mind. After they become successful, other agencies that don't have drone programs begin to ask for them to fly other missions. So the missions begin to expand, and they go into areas that they hadn't planned on. So they might not have a thermal image camera to start with, and now they need one because they're going to fly fire situations, or they're going to do search and rescue, and they want to be able to look for that heat signature of a lost person. And then as they progress, they start getting into a higher level of operation, which requires different technology. So that's that. And as far as the type of thermal imaging, I don't really have a recommendation. I think FLIR has pretty much cornered the market, and depending on how much money you want to spend is going to determine how much of the high resolution you can have.
We'll take a couple more questions. The next question is on, what are your thoughts on drone countermeasures near geofenced areas?
I'm sorry, I was switching over. Can you hear me on this microphone better?
I can hear you.
Okay. Ask me that question one more time.
what are your thoughts on drone countermeasures near geofenced areas?
So my personal opinion on geofenced in drones is I don't like it from a public safety perspective. And the reason I say that is because we often have missions that we need to fly right at the moment, and sometimes if you haven't done an immediate firmware update, that may prevent you from being able to fly. And that's just my personal.
Is your mic working? I think we were a little muffled there for a second. Okay. Are you back? I cannot hear you. Technology is great when it works, right? No. I think we lost you. Your mic's not working, but your video is. So I'll go ahead and answer a question while he gets that figured out, and we may have to be able have time to hop back and ask him a few questions. Well, a couple of questions were around the Department of Aviation. Do we have a fleet of drones, and do we have pilots here at the department? The answer is yes. We have 2 pilots on staff that are 107 pilots, and then we also maintain 2 drones here at the Department of Aviation as well. Are you back, Charles? Maybe not. So moving forward, there are a number of questions that we just were not able to get to because there is a number of questions. Please note that we are going to go through all the questions. We have who they're from. You had the contact information up on the screen. Please feel free to reach out to us at any time. We would love to kind of work through them. There were so many questions on starting programs, education, how to educate our students, moving forward, workforce, selecting what works best, a number of great questions. So please feel free to reach out to us at any time. We would love to help you kind of through that process. So from here, in the next 24 hours, you will be able to access this webinar on Launchpad so that you don't miss any of the InterDrone webinars. And then from here, let's see if we got Charles back.
Am I here? Am I here?
Sure. Yes, welcome back.
Hey, I apologize. I'm not sure what happened, but thanks for picking up there.
Oh, no worries, no worries. I was just telling him that there's a number of questions that were great questions and that they can feel free to reach out to either one of us because there were some great ones about education and programs and all of that. And then I was sharing with them where they can find the this webinar once we wrap up today, the next 24 hours. Is there anything you'd like to close with?
No, I think that the key is we have great opportunities to have information from the sky where before departments that didn't have aviation departments can now afford to have that visual they didn't have before. But again, you know, one person told me that when you're thinking about drones, the amateur studies strategy, the professional studies logistics. And a couple things that go into actually the drones themselves is knowing what you need in the way of missions, what capabilities you need. And again, drone responders gives that opportunity to link people up in different ways, to have communications, share information, and learn from each other. Again, we have the opportunity that we have the considerations and guidelines. And what I said before is there's also a saying that one drone is none and 2 drones is 1. And that comes from the reliability and redundancy standpoint perspective that, you know, no matter what we try to do, just as we did the technology in this presentation, we ran up against issues with technology. The same thing can happen with drones. So it's always good to have a backup that you can fly up and go forward. What we've also seen is sometimes there's need for missions to maintain a persistent overwatch. That means that if you're operating a a battery operated drone or electric drone, that it's going to have to be exchanged. So you want to have a drone that can go out and take the place of the one that's actually flying and keep flipping back and forth. But along with that comes logistics. You've got to have somebody that's there can help with the data that's coming in. If you're trying to provide streaming to someone else, to providing information of how the streaming is available, you also need to be able to have someone do logistics to change batteries and keep that charging ongoing, especially for a multi-hour operation. So there's a lot that gets into this. There's certainly a lot of value that comes from drones, but the most important thing is know what you're getting into. One other thing that we've learned is that York County is a great example of a multidiscipline team where their fire department and their sheriff's office combine. What becomes uniquely interesting about that is that, you know, when we have a fire incident, all of our firefighters and resources are focused on that fire. Having that multidiscipline approach allows the law enforcement side to fly the fire missions. And again, if you have an active shooter or a very large situation, the law enforcement are involved in trying to maintain all that perimeter and need all their officers so the fire guys or the fire remote pilots can fly. And so you have that synergy that takes place. In addition to that, what's really good about a multidiscipline team or even a regional team is that you're able to share the resources and share the burden. There's a certain amount of cost that comes. That means you share it. There's a certain amount of remote pilots you have to have and be trained so that you don't have the full burden of that on your plate. So with that, I think that wraps up my thoughts. If there's any other questions, I'll be glad to answer, but I'm good.
Sure, there's a couple of questions out since we have time, and there's a number of you that are kind of still hanging on. Probably 4 or 5 questions about, if not more, that I just see about questions are sending out the slides. Are you going to make these slides available to our audience, or is there a way they can go download your slides?
I think that it's certainly open for InterDrone to make these available if they like.
Okay, perfect. And could you give some idea of the cost savings when using a drone versus a helicopter?
Well, first, before I answer that question, let me just make sure that I say that a drone does not replace a helicopter. Okay, there are specific missions for helicopters. There are specific missions where drones are better. Longer flights over bigger areas, a drone's not the tool. The helicopter still needs to be there. In comparison, I believe I've seen some documentation places that if you think about buying a helicopter, it's millions of dollars just for the purchase. And then when you look at the operational time, I've seen references to $600 per hour. So right. It's significantly different.
Let's see. Is the trend for incorporating drones into public service towards using independent contractors or using in-house personnel such as pilots? This person wants to know, they would like to advise their students a little more regarding their career as a drone operator.
Okay, so most of the remote pilots in public safety are either firefighters, police officers, emergency managers. This is part of their, it's a collateral duty to an already existing situation. So if you're thinking about being a remote pilot and trying to get into public safety, you're probably not going to do it with that credential. There is now some options out there with some of the service providers. I think Drone Up and some others have a national contract where you can actually enter into an agreement to have service providers that they have contracted pilots in the area. I believe people can sign up to Drone Up for free and become contractors. So that's one opportunity. I think Measure may do something similar. And so the Drones for Service is going to have a more encompassing opportunity because it's also going to be in the commercial world. So it might be doing roof inspections, it might be doing solar panel inspections or utility line inspections. So the commercial side is going to give you more opportunities from a remote pilot perspective. The public safety side has some unique and exciting opportunities, but not as many just specific for remote pilot.
And the last question here, there's many more questions. Like I said, feel free to reach out to us. But the last question we're going to take today is, how accurate do studies show drones when conducting physical assessments, such as temperature and heart rate? This question came up when you were speaking about COVID-19.
So there is, there's the jury's still out on that, although I do know that there's, I think, a drone called Dragonfly, which has now come out with some exciting technology to do a lot of these things. can actually measure, like I said, respiration, heart rate, temperature, and some other things. I don't know the distance from which they can fly. And again, I think we still have an issue of community acceptance. This is a type of operation that people feel may be invading privacy, and it raises some questions of Fourth Amendment rights.
Perfect. And so with that, we'll say thank you again for attending this. This webinar will be available within the next 24 hours. We will have conversations with InterDrone as well as Charles to get these slides available. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at any time. Take care. Thanks for joining.